Go find another table, Mom. This one's for important people only. The words sliced through me like a knife. My adopted daughter, Sarah, said it with such casual cruelty that for a moment I actually thought I misheard her. But when the laughter followed, my biological son Tom, his smug wife, even my teenage grandkids giggling into their fancy napkins, I knew exactly what she meant. The Sterling Room wasn't just any restaurant. It was one of those marble and gold places where they pull out your chair, refill your glass before you even ask, and treat every whisper like it's money. I had raised Sarah to be kind, grounded. But tonight, she sat in designer silk, eyes gleaming with arrogance I'd never seen before. I stood there frozen, the stem of my wine glass trembling slightly in my hand. "Mom," Sarah said again, louder this time, tilting her head toward the bar. "They have smaller tables over there. Maybe you'd be more comfortable with your kind." Your kind. The entire restaurant had gone quiet. Her kind. The words hung between us like a slap in the face, because I knew exactly what she meant. She'd been adopted when she was 8 after years in the foster system. I was the woman who had spent sleepless nights teaching her to trust, to love again. And now, decades later, the girl I had called my daughter was dismissing me like a stranger. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Ellen Smith. Most people just call me Ellen. And at 66 years old, I've learned that revenge, well, sometimes it's just poetic justice wearing pearls. That night didn't begin with humiliation. It began with hope. Sarah had invited me to what she called a family dinner. I'd even picked up her favorite dessert from her childhood, pecan pie from Rosie's Bakery, because she used to say it reminded her of home. I thought it might be a chance to reconnect. But when I arrived, the maitre d' couldn't even find my name on the reservation. "Maybe they booked it under someone else's name?" I asked. He'd frowned politely. "The Sterling Room doesn't usually make that kind of mistake, ma'am." I should have known then. When I finally spotted Sarah's group, they were seated near the panoramic window, the kind of spot reserved for big spenders and influencers. My heart lifted for a moment until I noticed the look on Sarah's face when she saw me walking toward her. Not excitement, not warmth, embarrassment. As if I were a secret she didn't want anyone to know. She said, "Mom, we're kind of having a business thing tonight. You didn't have to come." I said, "But you invited me," softly, setting down the pie.
"Oh," she laughed, waving her hand. "Right, that was just to be polite. You know how people are." My son-in-law, Saeem, smirked. "You can join the next one, Ellen. Maybe after we've made the big announcement." I didn't even know what he meant. But what I did know, standing there like an uninvited ghost, was that my daughter had become a stranger. I found myself sitting at the bar, trying to keep my composure while they laughed from across the room. The waiter, bless him, quietly refilled my water and whispered, "They shouldn't treat you like that, ma'am." I smiled weakly. "Family, right?" He shook his head. "Some family forget who built their table in the first place." Those words hit me harder than Sarah's cruelty. Because he was right. I had built their table, their home, their comfort, their future. When Sarah was 8, she had nightmares so bad she'd wake up screaming. I would rush into her room, hold her until she stopped shaking. She'd whisper, "Don't ever leave me, Mom." Now, she couldn't stand being seen with me. I stayed through dinner, quietly eating at the bar, pretending not to watch as my family toasted champagne without me. Then, the moment that changed, everything happened. The waiter walked over to their table to confirm dessert orders. And that's when Sarah, my daughter, pointed right at me and said, "Oh, and make sure she doesn't get the bill. She's on a fixed income." The table erupted in laughter. Even my son laughed. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to shout, to tell them who I really was, the woman who'd paid their tuition, covered Sarah's medical bills, helped them buy their first home. But instead, I did something else. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked calmly toward the exit. Halfway there, I turned and locked eyes with the maitre d'. "I'll be back. Can you keep that table available for me tomorrow, same time?"
That night, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, went through some old files, legal ones. See, after my husband died, I invested our savings into a few restaurants in Chicago. One of them, ironically, was the Sterling Room. I'd been a silent investor for 15 years. I rarely used my stake, never pulled rank, never even visited the board meetings. I'd always believed in letting people run things their way. But that night, I changed my mind. When I checked the restaurant's ledger, I saw it. My name, still listed as a 42% shareholder. The majority stakeholder was an old friend of mine, Marcus Chen. He was the one who'd first convinced me to invest. We hadn't spoken in years, but I still had his number. So I called him. "Ellen?" His voice sounded groggy but surprised. "Well, this is a voice I didn't expect tonight." "Hi, Marcus," I said, forcing a small smile. "Do you still own the Sterling Room?" "Still? I practically live there," he laughed. "Why?" "Oh, no reason," I said sweetly. "Just wondering if you'd mind joining me there tomorrow night for dinner. I'll explain everything in person." The next day, I returned to the Sterling Room. The same maitre d' greeted me with a wide smile. "Mrs. Smith, your table is ready." I glanced across the room. The same table where my family had humiliated me was empty, waiting. But this time, I didn't come alone. Marcus joined me, along with the restaurant manager and a few staff members. Within minutes, we were deep in a private conversation. And by the end of it, Marcus shook my hand. "Let's make it official. Starting tomorrow, you're not just a shareholder, you're on the board again." I smiled, a spark of something fierce lighting inside me. Tomorrow, I would teach my family a lesson they never forget. And it would happen right here, in the place where they'd laughed at me.
The next morning, I woke up earlier than I had in years. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I finally felt something powerful. Purpose. For months, I had let my children and their families treat me like a burden. I'd made excuses for their coldness, their selfishness. But last night, something inside me snapped. The humiliation at the Sterling Room wasn't just about being disrespected. It was about realizing how completely I'd let them forget who I was. I wasn't some fragile old woman living off her pension. I was Ellen Smith, a retired entrepreneur who'd built, managed, and invested in businesses long before my kids learned to balance a checkbook. And this time, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to remind them. At 10 a.m. sharp, I met Marcus Chen at his office downtown. The man hadn't aged a day. Same slicked back hair, same amused grin. "So," he said, sliding a latte across the table, "tell me everything." And I did. I told him about Sarah's cruelty, the laughter, the way my own son joined in. I even told him about the pecan pie I'd brought, still sitting untouched at the bar. By the end, Marcus looked furious. "They humiliated you in your own restaurant, Ellen?" he said, shaking his head. "That's rich." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm inspired." He leaned back in his chair. "What are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I said with a small grin. "Just poetic." By noon, my plan was already taking shape. See, most people don't realize that restaurant investors, especially those with controlling shares, have access to far more than financial records. They can approve or deny events, control reservation lists, even authorize special private functions. So I called the general manager. "Hi, it's Ellen Smith," I said.
There was a pause. "Oh, Mrs. Smith, of course. How can I help you?" "I'd like to host a dinner party this Saturday evening, same time slot as last week's reservation." "You mean the Parker family's table?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Exactly that one." He hesitated. "But they've already booked it again for this Saturday."
"Oh, I'm aware," I replied sweetly. "Cancel it. It's being reserved for a private board dinner instead." A pause. Then, "Understood, Mrs. Smith." For the rest of the week, I went about my days like nothing had happened. I visited the florist, the tailor, and even the jewelry shop downtown. If I was going to make a statement, it needed to be unforgettable. Meanwhile, Sarah kept sending me meaningless texts. "Mom, you okay after dinner? You seemed sensitive. Sorry if the kids were being silly. You know how teenagers are." Each message made my stomach tighten. There wasn't a shred of real remorse in her words, only the tone of someone covering tracks. Then, on Friday, I sent her a message of my own. "Sweetheart, I wanted to talk to you in same. Why don't we meet again for dinner tomorrow night? My treat. Same place." Her response came within minutes. "Of course, Mom. Maybe we can all reset a little, huh?" Reset. Oh yes, we were resetting, just not in the way she thought. Saturday arrived, and the city buzzed with early spring warmth. I dressed deliberately, a sleek navy suit, pearl earrings, hair pinned back, the way I used to wear it during my business days. I looked like power disguised as grace. When I arrived at the Sterling Room, the maitre d' practically leapt to attention. "Mrs. Smith, welcome back." "Thank you, Evan," I said smoothly. "Are we ready for our guests?" "Everything's set, ma'am." I smiled. Perfect. Let's begin. Moments later, my family walked in, laughing, carefree, completely unaware. Sarah's dress shimmered under the chandelier, and Same strutted beside her, one arm draped around her shoulder. When she spotted me, her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Mom, you look amazing! What's the occasion?" "Oh, just a little celebration," I said lightly. "I've been meaning to share some news." She beamed. "Wonderful! I'm so glad we're doing this!" We sat at their table, the same one where she'd humiliated me last week. The waiters treated me with visible deference now, pulling out my chair, addressing me as Mrs. Smith in crisp tones. Sarah noticed immediately. "Wow," she murmured, glancing around. "They're being extra polite tonight." I smiled faintly. "Respect is contagious, darling. You should try it." She laughed awkwardly, not catching the edge in my voice. As the dinner progressed, I could see the confusion growing. Every staff member addressed me with quiet reverence, while treating the others with, well, polite distance. My son Tom finally whispered, "Mom, do you know the owner or something?" I dabbed my lips with a napkin. "Better than that, sweetheart. I am the owner." Their faces froze. Same looked incredulous. "You mean you're the reason our reservation got canceled last week?" "Oh, that was just a scheduling mix-up. I needed the space for a board meeting. My board meeting." The waiter brought out dessert, individual slices of pecan pie, just like the one I'd brought last week. Sarah frowned at it. "I didn't order this," she said. "I did," I replied softly. "You used to love pecan pie, remember? Said it reminded you of home." Her face went pale. "Funny thing," I continued, "I kept that pie from last week, had it wrapped and stored in the kitchen because something about that night told me I'd want to remember it." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp. "Sarah, I don't care about fancy restaurants or status, but the day you mocked me, in front of strangers, in a place I helped build, that was the day you forgot what family means." Her eyes welled up, but I didn't stop. "You wanted to humiliate me, and you succeeded. But here's the thing about shame. When you try to bury someone in it, you might just find yourself standing in the hole."
The rest of the table sat in silence. Then, as if the universe wanted to punctuate the moment, Marcus appeared, smiling warmly. He said, "Ellen," shaking my hand, "good to see you." He turned to the table. "You must be her family. I hope you know you're sitting with one of our founding partners. None of this would exist without her." He gestured around the restaurant. The chandeliers, the walls, the bustling elegance, all of it. Sarah's mouth fell open. Syme swallowed hard. "We had no idea." Marcus smiled. "Well, that's usually how humility works. The people who deserve it don't need to brag." He winked at me, then walked away. After he left, Sarah's voice followed me, trembling but sincere. "Mom, I'm sorry." I met her eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. "Don't be sorry," I said softly. "Just remember who made your table possible." That night, when the check arrived, the waiter handed it to me, but before I could reach for it, Tom stopped him. "No, Mom," he said quietly, "we've got it." I smiled. Now that's how family should sound. As I stood to leave, Sarah's voice followed me, trembling but sincere. "Mom, can we start over?" I paused at the door, turned, and smiled gently. "Maybe, but first you'll have to find the right table."
That night, after the confrontation at the Sterling Room, I couldn't sleep. Not because I regretted anything, but because something about Sarah's reaction gnawed at me. She wasn't just humiliated. She looked scared. Her eyes, those same hazel eyes I'd fallen in love with the day I adopted her at 9 years old, had been filled with panic, not defiance. It wasn't guilt from being exposed. It was fear. But fear of what? The next morning, I brewed my coffee and stared out at the garden, the first soft rays of sunlight touching the old maple tree. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Mom, can we meet? Just us. I owe you the truth." The words made my heart pound. We met that afternoon at a small cafe near the river, far from the upscale world she now pretended to belong to. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the woman from last night's dinner. Her hair was tied back, her makeup gone, and her hands trembled slightly as she took the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I almost didn't," I said evenly, "but curiosity's always been my weakness." She gave a bitter smile. "You've always been stronger than you think, Mom." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she finally said it. "It wasn't me, Mom. It was him." "Who?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "Same." Her voice cracked. "He's been controlling everything, the house, the kids, the money, even how I talk to you." My stomach tightened. "I tried to leave once," she continued, eyes filling with tears. "But he said if I did, he'd tell everyone I married him for your inheritance, that I'd used adoption to climb the social ladder." I stared at her, stunned. "That's absurd." "I know," she whispered, "but he's persuasive and cruel. You saw it that night, how he laughed. That wasn't just about me mocking you. He told me to do it." "Why?" "To humiliate you," she said softly. "He said you'd never forgive me, and then I'd have no one left to turn to but him." For a few moments, I couldn't breathe. The world tilted. All this time, I'd believed Sarah had changed, become shallow, entitled. But it wasn't her. It was manipulation, isolation. She'd been living under emotional captivity, smiling for the world while dying inside. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold, trembling. "Sarah," I said quietly, "you don't have to live like this anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's not that easy, Mom. He has everything in his name. The house, the savings,
even the kids' trust fund. I leaned closer. Then it's time we change that. That night, I opened the old safe in my study, the one I hadn't touched since my late husband, Richard, passed away 15 years ago. Inside were files, old contracts, and something I hadn't looked at in years, my original adoption paperwork for Sarah. But tucked behind it was something else, a folder Richard had labeled Emergency, for Ellen only. My heart skipped. Inside were notarized documents, property deeds, and a letter. Ellen, if you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. I set up contingency ownership for our daughter's security. The real estate under your trust also includes joint inheritance protection for Sarah. No one, and I mean no one, can claim ownership without your authorization. My fingers trembled as I read it again. It meant everything Sarah's husband thought he controlled, he didn't. Legally, I could shut it all down with a single signature. The next day, I called Marcus. I need your help with a few legal documents, I told him. He didn't ask questions. Marcus had been my business partner for 2 decades. He knew the tone in my voice. The old Ellen was back. By Friday, the paperwork was ready. Quiet transfers, revocations, and frozen accounts. Everything under Seam's financial reach now required my approval. All that was left was the final act. On Saturday evening, Sarah called again. Mom, he's planning something. He found out we met. I kept my voice calm. Where is he now? He's at your restaurant, she said, voice trembling. He said he's going to make a scene, tell everyone the truth about you. A cold calm washed over me. Oh, good, I said quietly. Let's make sure there's an audience. When I arrived at the Sterling Room, the air was thick with tension. Syme was already there, standing at the center of the dining room, drink in hand, surrounded by curious guests. Ah, there she is, he announced loudly, the great Ellen Smith, everyone's favorite victim. The room fell silent. He smirked. You think you can humiliate my wife and get away with it? You're nothing but a washed-up old woman living off your dead husband's money. I let him finish, every cruel word dripping from his lips like venom. When he finally stopped, I smiled faintly. Are you done, Syme? He sneered. Why? You going to throw me out of your restaurant? I tilted my head. Actually, yes. The general manager appeared at my signal, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers. Syme's smirk faltered. What the hell is this? I nodded towards the officers. Mr. Rahman, you're being asked to leave the premises permanently. You're trespassing.
He blinked. Trespassing? My wife's family owns... Correction, I interrupted. I do. I handed him a folded paper, the new ownership documents Marcus had finalized. His eyes darted over the signatures, disbelief turning into fury. This is fraud, he barked. No, dear, I said softly. This is protection. Everything you've been spending, manipulating, or controlling, the bank accounts, the house, the trusts, it's all under my guardianship now. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Syme's face turned red. You can't do this. I already did. He lunged forward, but the officers stepped between us. As they escorted him out, Sarah ran to me, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Mom, she whispered, voice breaking, I don't deserve this kind of mercy. I held her tightly. You deserve peace, not punishment, but now you have to earn it. She nodded, sobbing. I will, I promise. Later that night, when the restaurant was empty, I sat alone at the same table where this nightmare had begun. Marcus joined me, setting down 2 glasses of wine. He chuckled softly. Not a queen, Marcus. Just a mother who finally remembered who she was. He raised his glass. To remembering. I smiled. And to never being invisible again. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free.
The night after Syme was thrown out of the Sterling Room, I expected silence. Maybe a few threatening calls or angry emails. He was that type of man. But for 2 days, there was nothing. No messages, no visits. Then came the scream. Sarah called just after midnight, voice shaking so violently I could barely make out the words. "Mom, he's taken them! He's taken the kids!" My blood froze. "Where are you?" "At home," she sobbed. "He came in through the back gate, said he was just going to talk, but when I refused to let him in, he grabbed them from their rooms. He's gone, Mom! Please help me!" I was already moving before she finished. 15 minutes later, I was at her house, the same lavish home he'd paraded as his. The front door was open wide, curtains torn, Sarah on the floor, clutching a stuffed toy. "Sarah, look at me," I said, kneeling beside her. "When did he leave?" 20 minutes ago. He said he was taking them to his mother's place in Karachi, but Mom, his mother died last year." I felt a chill run down my spine. That meant he was lying. He was going underground. Within an hour, I had Marcus and a private investigator, an old friend named Ethan, on the case. Ethan wasn't your typical gumshoe. He was ex-law enforcement, with contacts in half the airports in the country. He'll try to leave through a private airstrip. He's too smart to go through commercial routes with a custody threat hanging over him. Sarah was pacing, her voice raw. "Please, just find them. He won't hurt them, right?" Ethan's eyes darkened. A man who uses his own children as weapons is unpredictable, but we'll find them. That night, while Ethan's team combed through footage and records, I sat in my study staring at the adoption documents again. My late husband, Richard, had always prepared for the worst, and that included establishing contingency guardianship for Sarah's children. If I could prove Saeem's instability, I could have full custody transferred under emergency order. I called Marcus. "Get me the family court judge, the one who handled Richard's estate. Tell her it's urgent." By morning, papers were in motion. 2 days later, Ethan called. "Found him," he said. "Private hangar outside Multan. He's using a borrowed name, but the kids are with him." I felt my knees weaken. "Are they safe?" "So far, yes, but he's planning to leave tonight." "Then we move now," I said, quietly. By evening, Sarah and I were in an unmarked SUV parked near the small airfield. The desert wind howled around us as we watched a white SUV pull up near the hangar. "There," Ethan whispered through the radio. "That's him." Saeem stepped out, dragging the kids by the hand, little Emma, only 7, and Daniel, barely 10, clutching their backpacks. "Please, Daddy, I want to go home," Emma whimpered. "Home is wherever I say it is." My vision blurred with rage. "Now," I whispered. Ethan's team moved in, 3 plainclothes agents blocking the path to the plane. One of them flashed a warrant. "Saeem Rahman, you are under arrest for child endangerment, kidnapping, and violation of a court protection order." He froze, face twisting in disbelief. What protection order?" I stepped forward, my voice calm but cold. "The one signed 2 hours ago. You've officially lost custody, Saeem." He turned, eyes wide with fury. "You think you can ruin me, Ellen? You think you've won?" I met his glare. "I don't think, Saeem. I know." He lunged toward me, but Ethan caught him, pressing him against the car as officers cuffed him. Sarah ran to the children, collapsing as they clung to her, sobbing. "It's okay, my babies," she whispered. "You're safe now, you're safe." I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her back. For the first time in years, I saw something I hadn't seen in her eyes since she was a little girl. Trust. "Mom," she said softly, tears streaming down. "How did you do this?" I smiled faintly. By remembering who I raised. The next morning, the story hit the news. Businessman arrested for kidnapping his own children after inheritance fraud allegations.
Every network wanted an interview. Every paper called it the socialite scandal of the year. But I stayed quiet. Silence is power, and power was finally mine again. 3 weeks later, we stood in court. Saeem sat there in a cheap gray suit, his arrogance drained. Sarah held my hand the whole time, shaking. But when the judge read the final ruling, her grip tightened. Full custody of the minors Emma and Daniel is awarded to the legal guardian Ellen Smith under the Protection of Joint Parental Rights reinstated to Sarah Rahman. Saeem's lawyer stood, sputtering about false claims and emotional manipulation, but the judge silenced him. Mr. Rahman, you built your fortune on deceit. This court will not allow you to destroy a family to feed your ego.
The gavel struck. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Miss Smith, is it true you orchestrated your son-in-law's downfall? Did you plan this revenge from the beginning? I turned to the cameras, smiled softly, and said, no. I simply stopped letting him win. That night, we had dinner together. Me, Sarah, the kids, and Marcus. The children were quieter than usual, but when dessert came, little Emma tugged my sleeve. Grandma, she said, Mom said you're like a superhero. Are you? I laughed softly, kissing her forehead. No, sweetheart, I'm just a woman who learned how to fight back. When everyone went to bed, I stood by the window, staring out into the night sky. For years, I'd felt powerless. As a widow, as a mother watching her daughter slip away, as a woman whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. But now, everything was clear. Power wasn't in money or status. It was in knowing when to strike and when to stay silent. As the moonlight glimmered over the garden, I whispered to the darkness, you wanted to destroy my family, Saeem, but all you did was bring us back together. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt peace.
The courthouse doors closed behind us like the final page of a long, ugly chapter. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, strangers pointed. But when we walked away, holding hands, Sarah, the children, and me, the noise felt far away, as if we were inside a warm room while a storm raged beyond the windows. For a while after the ruling, nothing felt real. People told me I was brave. Friends called me a hero. Strangers sent flowers. But my days were filled with practical things. School forms, doctor visits, filling out custody paperwork, and making sure the children had their favorite pajamas. Heroism was suddenly very domestic. Saeem's arrest made headlines for a week. Then he became another cautionary tale. The tabloids loved scandal. They hated nuance. The truth, that a woman had sat quietly, gathered facts, and acted to protect her family, didn't fit as neatly into a headline. But that didn't matter. The people who mattered, Sarah and those 2 small children, knew the real story. The first week in our temporary home felt fragile. Emma clung to me at night. Daniel woke up once and called for "Grandma" in the dark. I found myself doing the small things that stitch a broken life back together. Making pancakes on Saturday mornings, fixing scraped knees, and reading far too many bedtime books with terrible voices. Those hours, ordinary and repetitive, were my penance and my balm. Sarah hovered between relief and guilt. She apologized 100 times in private, each one softening something in me, but not erasing the years. I listened. I tried not to lecture. Instead, I taught her how to write a budget, how to read contracts, how to say no without flinching. Watching her rebuild, not just her life, but her sense of self-worth, was a different kind of victory. Mark, too, returned. He stayed for a while, repainting walls, fixing the creaky step, and buying new curtains. He arrived with his own quiet remorse. Our conversations were awkward at first. There were things unsaid that felt too large to fit into small talk, but we worked through them. He told me how he'd been ashamed to admit his blindness, and how, for months, he'd been juggling work panic and a home life he didn't understand. He was rebuilding himself as well. The legal process continued slowly. Restitution hearings dragged on. Consumer Protection pursued Saim's shell companies and the shady accounts he'd used. Some money was recovered, some was gone into thin air. Justice is never complete in the way we fantasize. It's messy, partial, and bureaucratic, but it is sometimes sufficient. One afternoon, a social worker I'd met during the early chaos called. "Mrs. Smith, would you consider being a mentor at the Family Outreach Center? We need someone who understands both law and heart." I turned the idea over like a coin. The thought of helping others, women who'd been gaslit by partners, people who'd been left with impossible choices, felt right. So I said yes. Helping others became my therapy. I met women who'd been gaslit by partners, people who'd been left with impossible choices. I listened. I advised where I could. Sometimes I went to court with a trembling voice. Sometimes I simply brewed too strong tea and sat. They called me steady, a word that felt like a chorus of all the small bits of courage I'd learned to assemble. There were hard nights. The memory of the initial humiliation with Sarah, the laughter in that restaurant, would catch me unexpectedly. It was a jagged shard that creaked when touched, but instead of letting those memories hollow me out, I let them sharpen my resolve to not be invisible ever again. Months later, a quiet thing happened. It was ordinary, yet miraculous. On a rainy Tuesday, Sarah came into the kitchen holding a small folded note. "Listen," she said, tentative. She read it aloud. "To Grandma Ellen, thank you for bringing my mom back, for stopping the bad man, for the pancakes. Love, Emma." My throat thickened. Emma's kid scrawl was messy but true. I sat at the table and stared at that note for a long time. It meant what no headline had said. We were healing. That little note was worth more than any bitter satisfaction or public vindication. It was proof that love, when protected, can regrow. Siam's legal appeals dragged through the courts. He tried to argue entrapment, then innocence, then slander. Those arguments crumbled as witnesses came forward. The private investigator with time-stamped footage, the bank records, and the local contractors who'd never been paid. When he was finally sentenced to a term that matched the severity of his crimes, I felt no triumph in his defeat. I felt only the relief that we had a measure of safety restored. There were other reckonings, too. People we thought were friends, acquaintances who sided with his charm, quietly backed away. Payrolls and partnerships severed. The social circle that once reveled in status found itself oddly thin. They didn't call as often, they didn't stop by. The town's kindness shifted towards us in slow, careful ways. A casserole here, a babysit offered there, an unremarked nod from someone who'd once avoided eye contact. I kept a journal through this time because life is a strange mix of practicalities and philosophy. In it, I wrote about small victories, like taught Emma to tie her shoes today. Sarah made a call to her old therapist. Mark fixed the leaky tap without swearing. The daily ledger of tiny rebuildings felt like prayer. One afternoon, months after the first headlines, Marcus called. "You did well," he said, simply. He'd been quietly auditing his investments and had even set up a small scholarship fund in our family's name at a community college. For folks who need a hand and a chair at the table, he added. I accepted without ceremony. Acts of quiet kindness like that ripple outwards. And then, one golden autumn day, we returned to the Sterling Room, not for confrontation, but to sit quietly, to celebrate the fact that we could. The maitre d' greeted us warmly, and there was no awkwardness. The staff treated us like family. We ordered pecan pie, of course. A small, tender homage to an evening that had gone so wrong. As we ate, Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, she said simply, I see you now. Not the old woman I thought you were, but the woman who kept us all alive. Her voice broke, and I saw the weight she had carried begin to lift. Thank you, I said, for coming back. It was a small exchange, but it felt like a seal. People often ask whether I regret what I did. They want neat answers. Was the vengeance worth the cost? Would I have chosen differently? The truth is, it wasn't about vengeance at all. It was about boundaries. It was about using every tool at my disposal to protect those I loved. The law gave me one set of answers. My conscience gave me another. I listened to both. In the quiet that follows storms, the work is not glamorous. It's making sure the kids remember the names of their cousins, teaching them to cook something that doesn't explode, laughing at a terrible joke. It's learning to be content with small rhythms. It's choosing to be present. On the anniversary of the court ruling, we planted a small oak in the garden. Emma pressed the shovel into the soil, Daniel watered the first sapling, and Sarah spoke about starting a community group for families hurt by fraud. I stood there, dirt under my nails, smiling with a tired heart. When the sun dipped low, Mark draped his arm over my shoulder and said, You were right, Mom, about almost everything. He didn't say the part about pride. That was understood. We didn't need headlines to define us. The final thing I did, alone on a quiet evening, was open a letter from the family court. It was a short note of commendation for my proactive role in protecting 2 minors from harm. The official language was bland, bureaucratic, but I folded that note and placed it in the box with Emma's scribbled thank you note and the photo of our little oak. That night, I sat by the window watching the light fade across the garden. A gentle peace settled in my chest. I had not set out to be a crusader or a villain. I had simply refused to be invisible. I had learned how to stand, how to fight, and finally, how to rest. If anyone asks what the moral is, I'll tell them something simple.
Dignity is not loud. It's patient. It's paperwork done on time. It's witnesses gathered. It's calls made at midnight. And it's a hand offered when a child is shaking with fear. You don't always need a war to win a life. Sometimes you need a stubborn heart and a small, steady plan. We rebuilt a life together, one meal, one night, one apology at a time. And in that slow rebuilding, we found something better than victory. We found each other. If you stayed with this story to the end, tell me, would you have fought the way Ellen did or taken a different path? Comment below, like if this moved you, and subscribe for daily stories that prove the loudest justice often comes in quiet steps.